Hello, everybody. Now, from the UK, I'm living in a land at the moment which has been changed over the last couple of weeks into something that I don't recognize. We have two-tier policing, we have two-tier justice, and everyone around the world is looking at the UK and saying, what on earth is going on in your country? I mean, this is the country that gave the world the Magna Carta, the English Bill of Rights, which is the foundation for every universal declaration of human rights that there is. The UN one, the EU one, the American Bill of Rights. It was founded on rights that we get from the English Bill of Rights in 1689. But that seems to have been completely taken over and undermined by this dreadful new police state Bolshevik style regime that we have under who is come to be known as two-tier because we have two-tier policing and we have two-tier justice. And we already know, we've seen two-tier policing clearly on the streets where police go softly on what they call counter protests and this emerging group called the Muslim Defense League. Now, that again is not to say the majority of Muslims are involved in that, because they're not, but there are a hardcore of people who are going out and harassing people on the streets, as well as the protests against the rise in violent crime, a lot of it associated with migrants, that happened after the murder of 3 English girls in Southport and the attempted murder of 8 more children and 2 adults, which happened there. So they're going hard on anyone who is protesting against rising migrant crime, violent crime in this country. Now, some people deserve to be taken up by the police who are involved in mindless looting and rioting, absolutely. But the vast majority of people going out on protests are peaceful and actually standing and looking on in horror as things get violent in some of the places. And the reason why there is a lot of violence, I think, and it's very clear to me, as I've said before, having been on all of the freedom rallies for 2 whole years back in 2020 to 2022, is that there are agents in the crowd. There are accelerators and agitators in the crowd whose job it is to throw things at the police, to get trouble going, so that the media has pictures of violent clashes between so-called rioters and the police. And then you get unfortunate patsies caught up in the middle of it and actually start to get involved as well. Some of them are drunk, some of them are on drugs. But also, appallingly, you had over in Belfast someone put in prison because they were just standing and watching. And a judge said that if you're just standing and watching, you will be held on remand without police bail, just for being a non-participant, just in the vicinity watching what's going on, a curious onlooker, as the judge described him over there in Belfast. I mean, this is utterly repugnant, because you are supposed to, if you're in the law system, if you're a judge or if you're a prosecutor or a barrister or whatever, you are supposed to be finding the truth. And you are supposed to be convicting people who are guilty of real crimes, but people who are innocent should not be caught up and dragged through the system. But this is a repugnant statement by a judge, suggesting that even if you're innocent, you will be dragged through the system, denied bail, put through a court case. Probably, you'll have it dropped in the end if you are innocent and you're just an innocent, curious bystander. But the process is the punishment in this case. And they're picking up completely innocent people and keeping them on remand in a remand prison or something for a few months. This is repugnant, this is Bolshevik, and it doesn't have any place in my country. And neither does the Starmer regime, which is doing it along with repugnant judges. Now, what is very, very disturbing over the last few days is that a number of people have been jailed, put in prison for long, long periods of time for putting posts on social media. When in the same period of time, there are paedophiles who have lots and lots of pictures. I'm not going to use the words to describe them because, I have to be careful with what I say here. But there are people who have got material, two cases, one in Ipswich, one in Cwmbran in Wales, you can look them up, where judges have acquitted people who have committed that crime. They're just free to go out and walk the streets again. Whereas people who have just written things on social media, whether they're fine or not fine, have been put in prison for a long time. I think the worst one of three cases or four cases that I've seen and that have had a lot of public attention was the case of Lee Joseph Dunn, who was jailed for 2 months, for 8 weeks, for putting up 3 memes on Facebook. And one of them was a picture of Asian men, and it said, "Coming to a town near you." Well, this is exactly what Angela Rayner, the deputy leader of the Labour Party and now in the Starmer regime, has said she's going to do. She's going to spread asylum seekers all around the country, and maybe empty the hotels, but place them in every district, every borough, all over the country, whether it's England, Wales, Scotland, or Northern Ireland. So he's just basically stating what the government policy is. In a meme, I think obviously he's opposed to the government policy, as am I. The leader of the Heritage Party, registered with the Electoral Commission and standing 41 candidates in the last election. I am opposed to spreading asylum seekers around the country as well. Am I going to be arrested too? Who knows? They're making these kind of threats, and they're making the atmosphere in this country an atmosphere of fear, where people censor themselves and suppress themselves from legitimate comments about government policy. And writing memes, posting memes is a legitimate form of social commentary. So Lee Joseph Dunn, in my opinion, is a political prisoner of the Starmer regime. He shouldn't be in prison, and this judgment, in my opinion, is repugnant, which is a legal term meaning that it is contradictory to our Bill of Rights and our fundamental freedoms. Now, there are a couple of other cases which have received a lot of attention. Now, in contrast to the one I've just mentioned, with these ones, I don't agree with what the people have written, and I would not post it myself. The most widely spoken about case here is that of Lucy Connolly, who is the wife of a Tory councillor in Northamptonshire, and she posted on X something, mass deportation now. Okay, well, that's a legitimate political position, but then what she went on to say is set fire to all the bleep hotels full of bleep for all I care, and so on. You can see the full comment on most social media platforms. Now, the thing is, she was being arrested and she's being held on remand until a date in September where there will be a further hearing on the basis that this is stirring up racial hatred. Again, I don't think it is. I would not write something like this myself, and I wouldn't advise anyone to write anything like this anywhere. But she did. But the thing is, this is not incitement to violence, which is what the law should be. But because we have this concept of hate in law, first introduced, as I've said before, surprisingly by Margaret Thatcher in the 1986 Public Order Act, this has been deemed to be stirring up hatred, which is why she's been arrested. and held on remand pending a trial and pending a charge. The thing is, she writes in it, "For all I care," is one of the things. Now, if she hadn't have put that, it probably would have been a clear statement to incite violence. But from what I'm seeing, it's not. It's just expressing an opinion, even though it's not an opinion that I think is helpful or good to express. But that's where it is. So my opinion here is that she shouldn't have been arrested. It's just speech, and the police should be out arresting real criminals who are doing real criminal damage, real violence, real assaults, real arson. Those are the people that the police should be going after, not people who are expressing opinions on social media, however distasteful they may be. The thing here is that another person from Northampton called Tyler Kay, and this has been in the papers a lot. It has been spoken about a lot. Reposted that exact comment from Lucy Connolly, and he was arrested. Apparently, pleaded guilty straight away, and has already been given 38 months in prison. There's over 3 years in prison for a post on X. This is ridiculous when pedos are going free and when the Starmer regime itself is releasing violent criminals, including murderers and worse. Well, they can't be worse than a murderer, but people, obviously, I got to be careful with my language and how often I use words, but people who do appalling things to women, you know what I mean. Those kind of people are being released early, and they're being replaced by people who write things on social media. And this, again, I think is repugnant, and it is a clear example of two-tier justice, which is bringing in a Bolshevist system to this country, which we need to resist at all costs, because we don't want to end up like the Bolshevik Soviet Union that Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote about in the Gulag Archipelago, where people could be just picked up and they're given up to 10 years in prison, a tenner they called it. People just summarily, you're on the list, they make up some charge. It could be something that they said. They accuse you of saying something which is against some new laws that they made up. You might have lent on Lenin's statue and been deemed to be subverting the state. You're picked up and you're in the gulag for 10 years. Well, we're at the beginning stages of this in the UK. We have people who are saying things on social media with these new laws which have been brought in over the last 30, 40 years. Especially under Blair and then the fake Conservatives. We've got all these kind of laws. It's not just the Public Order Act 1986 that started it off. There's the Race and Religious Hatred Act. There's the Communications Act, Section 127. There's the Police Crime Courts and Sentencing Act. There's a new Public Order Act. There's the Online Safety Act. All of these things are acting together to militate against free speech. And the regime seems to be going after people whose opinions they don't like, rather than and taking that more seriously and being more harsh to people for their opinions than actually people committing real crime. I mean, on the same day that Tyler Kay was put in prison for 38 months, in the same court with the same judge, apparently someone called Amjad Ali, who was at a real riot, throwing a real missile at real police, was jailed for 14 months. So, just over a year. So about, approximately a third of the time for a real physical crime than for someone who puts a post on social media. Again, I say I don't agree with the post. I don't think you should write posts like this. But for someone to have 3 times as much prison time for a social media post as to someone who actually went out and actually threw something at another person, potentially injuring them, I mean, again, that's repugnant, and that's two-tiered justice. Another case which has been widely reported on is that of Jordan Parler from Leeds. Now, again, he said something I don't like. I don't agree with it. He says, I'm not going to read out the post in full, but it's essentially saying that he's in favour of people smashing up a particular hotel in Leeds where there were asylum seekers staying. Again, I don't like that. I would not. I would say don't make things like that. Don't post things like that. But he got 20 months in prison for that. Again, why is someone getting 20 months for a post on Facebook when real people doing real crimes who hurt, men, women, and children are walking free? It doesn't make any sense to any normal thinking person. But we need to understand we're now living in a Bolshevist cultural Marxist regime, which is inverting everything and turning everything on its head. And it is very, very wicked. And it needs to be resisted peacefully and within the bounds of the law and the constitution we have, the English constitution based on the Bill of Rights of 1689, which was before the Act of Union in 1707, so that goes back to the time before the Union. That is a very important document that outlines our fundamental rights and freedoms, and we need to stand on those, and we need to stand on common law and our sovereignty as sovereign individual people against the tyranny of this Bolshevist communitarian state that is coming in. Now, I've seen a couple of very, very useful things over the course of today and yesterday, linking to certain documents which advise you what to do if you find yourself on the wrong side of the police state, if they come and arrest you either on a protest. Again, I've said before, don't get involved in violent protests. If you're on a protest, a legitimate, peaceful protest, that's good and absolutely right that people protest against the tyranny and the changes, the repugnant changes coming to this country. But if anything happens, if there's any accelerators, agitators there, walk away. If the police come along, walk away. Just don't be a patsy, please. Protest, but don't be a patsy. Stay well away from any trouble. If you see anything flaring up, walk away immediately. Don't get involved in it. And then we can protest peacefully against these things. And that makes our case all the more stronger. But if you are, you can be arrested either on a protest or, the police come round to your home sometimes and question you and try to get you to incriminate yourself. And some of the very good advice people give, two fantastic bits of advice is don't say a word. So if the police come and they want to talk to you, then you say nothing. Don't say a word. The other very useful piece of advice, which is very similar to this, is to say no comment. So if you actually are arrested, you're taken to the police station, the two words to remember are no comment. Whatever they ask you, apart from your name and address, at the front desk, is no comment, no comment, no comment. Don't say anything, even if they're playing good cop, bad cop with you, even if they're offering you things, trying to manipulate you, whatever they're trying to get you to incriminate yourself. Because what I've sadly come to realize, is I was brought up to trust the system in this country, brought up to believe the British police, the British judiciary, the British system was the best and fairest in the world. But it isn't. And it's really, really sad to realize that through the experience of the last 4 years. And now we can see that playing out in even greater measure now than we did in the lockdown era. The police are not on your side. I hate to say that, because I do know some good police officers, some good police constables, but in general, they're not trying to find the truth. They're not trying to find who's guilty and who's innocent half the time. They're picking a target and they're trying to get you incriminated, because once they've arrested you, they want to convict you of something, because you know they want 100% conviction rate. So don't incriminate yourself. Just say nothing or say no comment. Do anything that they ask you, and then hopefully that will make their life harder, and they won't be able to incriminate you if you're innocent, because so many times people have been incriminated when they're innocent. And I've spoken. This is a different issue entirely, but I've spoken many times about the case of Lucy Letby, and she spoke in the interviews. And they twisted some of her words, and they've twisted what she wrote down in her private diaries and put it together with all kinds of made up circumstantial evidence to convict her terribly. And, I think she's a big victim of a miscarriage of justice. So you see what they've done to her. You see what they've done to the first person I mentioned on the social media arrest, Lee Joseph Dunn, just writing memes, getting put into prison, and others. So this regime is boasting that they've arrested 1,000 people connected with riots, which were, it's not right to call them that, because the vast majority of people were protesting. And as I said, there are real hooligans that were involved, who are deplorable, who just took advantage in order to go loot shops and get involved in trouble. And there are government accelerators and agents making things worse. But, so really the best way to describe these things are anti-mass immigration protests, rising crime protests. And then you've got the counter protests, which are pro-mass immigration protests by cultural Marxists, who obviously have the favour of the state. So that's the right way to describe the two different groups that we're seeing. But obviously the regime we've got is clearly on one side, or rather, they're controlling the counter demonstrations. I mean, this Stand Up to Racism organisation is very, very much intimately linked with the Labour Party, as is this Hope Not Hate, Hate Not Hope, as it is more accurately called, that goes around accusing people of being far right all the time. I mean, they've done that to me. I've appeared in their State of Hate report for the last 3 years, which is absolutely, completely ridiculous. But there you go. So this is where we are. And the thing is, they've arrested 1,000 people, so they say. But the thing is, there are millions of people who utterly disdain this regime. And from what I hear, more and more people are very, very unhappy. I know people were very unhappy before the election with the fake conservatives, and that's absolutely right and understandable, because they've wrecked this country slowly, maybe for 14 years, but it doesn't mean that it's not wrecked. But this Stalinist Bolshevik government that we got now is just accelerating the process. So I said before the election, the fake conservatives will destroy the country slowly, Labour will destroy the country quickly, and we can see the difference here. So we've got rid of one bad lot of apples, we've got the worst lot of apples here in the government, to use a phrase, not that they're pleasant like apples, but they are ruining and destroying the country and the fabric of society and our freedom very quickly, and you can see that. But the thing is that on the converse of that, more people are very, very agitated, inside about what's going on, and very, very unhappy with the Bolshevik style regime that we have. And I don't think that people are going to put up with it for much longer, because you cannot treat the British people as some of us identify. Others identify as English, Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish. I'm actually coming round more to the concept of identifying as English, Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish rather than British. which is a very interesting thing. That we could make a whole other video on that. But it's still something that is taking form in my mind. But that's a whole other thing. But it is the people of this land, the people of these islands, are not going to put up with this anti-freedom Bolshevism for too much longer. They're not going to get away with this, and they're not going to be able to continue, because the spirit of freedom burns strong in the people of this land, and we will have our freedom.